Hey guys, our guest tonight is a graduate of this Loyola University in percussion performance, and he is also owner of Ray Fransen's Drum Center in Kenner. He is a professional drummer and percussionist and has been teaching private lessons here for 35 years. Please welcome my dad, Ray Fransen.
Hey.
So I think we're going to invite you guys to kind of stop us at any time and ask questions. That way we're not stuck with a huge gap at the end. So please feel free to stop and go wander up to the mics if you have questions. So, you started playing drums at around age 14, which is kind of late for some instruments. What made you decide to pursue that in college?
Well, I have no idea. Well, first, before I started that, I'm going to thank everybody for having me here. It's a real privilege to be here and get a chance to talk with you all. And I do want to encourage anybody that has any questions to stop us as we go, because that's the time to ask them. Now, in reference to the starting drums, I was kind of an introverted kid. I was pretty overweight and kind of out of the scheme of things, particularly in those days. We're talking about the 50s when I grew up in them. So, everybody was athletic. I was not, and I kind of escaped into music. I listened to a lot of a great variety of music. I was fortunate my parents played a wide cross-section of music, so I heard a lot of classical, I heard a lot of jazz, I heard a lot of everything, and the music was something of an escape for me. And as I got further along with the drums appealed to me, I think because it was a physical thing that I could finally do. And oddly enough, it was pursuing the drums that led me towards actually getting in better shape physically and keeping myself that way. The drums have motivated me to do a lot of things along those lines. But once I got involved past the technique part of it, there was a creative aspect of it. It was just being able to express myself. And there was a lot of change going on in music in those days, in the 60s and the early 70s. And there are a lot of opportunities for self-expression, and there's a lot of emphasis on individuality. And so this really rung my bell, and that was pretty much what did it right there.
And you continued that after college. You went on the road for a couple of years. How did your degree from Loyola help prepare you for a career as a professional musician?
Well, Loyola was cranking. It had really awakened around that time. There were a lot of changes in faculty. There was a lot more progressive thinking coming in. And, the era that I came through is a little different. I think I deal with about 55 private students a week, and I've been doing that for a long time. And I've been able to see trends and such. And in those days, it was emphasized that we were kind of like hired guns. We were out there for hire on an individual basis. And so the most you can learn was the best thing you could do. I mean, just get as much of a cross-section as possible, just be able to go out there and sell your skills as many different ways as you could. And with always kind of a fix on, I think, with the individuality. And at the time I came here, I was lucky enough to hit about the time that the jazz band program really started cranking. Joe Hebert came in and really turned that thing around. We had some really excellent teachers, really progressive teachers, Bert Bro, Esther Olin. And some of the old teachers were incredible too, Guy Bernard, Pat McCarty. And they gave us really good foundations in a lot of different areas. And I was able to take a lot of the playing experience I got here and go out with it. And in particular with the jazz band, Joe was just throwing monstrous stuff at us. And, stuff that was harder than we were probably going to play when we got out. So that was really beneficial too.
Well, most of the people in this room probably recognize you from the store, which is Ray Fransen's Drum Center. You guys are celebrating your 25th anniversary this year. So where along the line of your playing career did you decide to go into retail?
Well, Victor Borga was a classical pianist comedian who used to close his concerts with a line, "I'd like to thank my parents for making this possible and my children for making it necessary." And that was pretty much it. When your brother was born, he was about 2 years old. And I was looking at what I was doing, and I was doing fine. I mean, I had made a good living teaching, a good living playing, as good as you could probably do. Had a nice new house and all this business. But I realized that everything I was doing was selling time, and there was only so much time you could sell and only so much you could sell it for. And the market would really bear so much. I had some opportunities to move away from here. I got offered a job teaching at Berkeley, went up there and interviewed, got the job. But a lot of it would have involved having my wife discontinue what she had developed over these years, which was a big, big teaching practice, a private teaching practice. She graduated from Loyola in '73. And so it didn't seem fair to make her, start from scratch just so I could follow my star. And yet, by the same token, I could foresee that I was going to be an absentee father. And I didn't want that to happen. That wasn't the way it was supposed to be. So it really became, to me, it became a necessity to find some other way of generating income besides just the playing and teaching. Unfortunately, what I couldn't have predicted was that the store took twice as many hours as the playing and the teaching. And it still does take an immense amount of hours, but the difference is that I can walk away from it. There are times I can walk away, and it's somewhat self-sustaining. I've got a great staff and such, and so it did accomplish that. So I could go to the baseball games, and I could go to the campouts and all that other stuff, which a lot of my contemporaries couldn't do because they were always out selling time.
So your store remains to be the largest and oldest percussion store in Louisiana. What challenges did you face starting a retail business from the ground up?
Well, not knowing the damn thing I was doing was a pretty big challenge. I had no concept about business. I had no business background. I had a good academic background. I had my music background. I had a performance degree. So that really didn't prepare me for much. And as a matter of fact, I went to several different banks to try to get funded for this thing, and got turned down flat. And it was only one very progressive bank that thought I was worth the gamble. So anyway, and it wasn't the bank I'd banked with my whole life either. It was unbelievable. I just had no concept at all. I couldn't have done any bookkeeping, nothing. And I decided up front that I was going to try to find out about those things myself because I didn't want to turn it over to anybody else until I understood a little bit about it. So it was a school of hard knocks for the most part. I don't think you could do it like that now. I really don't. As a matter of fact, I know you could. There's no way. As a matter of fact, you guys are actually doing something that I consider to be brilliant. Trying to combine the idea of music and business together. One of the great failings, I've had an opportunity over the years of working with some really high-level performers in clinics and things like that. And the one thing they all have in common is that they really treat themselves as a product. We've all been kind of conditioned along the way because of a lot of myths that have been established by movies and books and such about how you can't be a creative artist, you can't be a viable performing artist unless you're totally bohemian. The minute you become successful, somehow or another you've compromised yourself, and that's not really true. It's not true at all. It's true. It happens to some people, but it's not a necessity. It's not part of the criteria. And all the guys I know that are successful are still creative monsters, but they treat themselves as products, and that's why what you guys are doing really makes a lot of sense. I had no idea about the business aspect of it, none whatsoever. Zero. And the most fortunate thing I ran into was a really good friend of mine who was a bass player who was a CPA, and he educated me really fast. So anyway, that was it. It was just school of hard knocks, basically. And also, I had second mortgage of the house, and just stuck and put a lot of savings into it. And it was by today's standards, a pretty minimal investment. At the time, it seemed like a fortune, But and it took about 3 years is what it took. And where we lucked out was that, and it was totally dumb luck. There were some juggernaut stores here who had, like Worldlines was a great example. Worldlines was the oldest music store in the United States. You couldn't want much more of a juggernaut than that. And they just didn't take us very seriously. So, we were kind of like the beavers, eating at the pilings and bringing the pier down eventually, and they weren't noticing us, and so we were able to come in and hit pretty hard because they weren't paying attention to us. If they had really paid attention to us, at any given time during their first 3 or 4 years, they could have wiped us out. They just made a concerted effort, So.
Well, your store is particularly unique in the fact that you guys offer private lessons as well as the retail experience. You have 4 teachers, including yourself. How has that helped the business and vice versa?
Well, I look at the whole thing as being interconnected. I see everything that I do being interconnected. The playing, the teaching, the retail part of it. It's all part of the same thing to me. And when I opened the store, my reputation as a private teacher was pretty well established by that point. So, it became important it became important to try to maintain that, because I knew that was a functional part of what I was doing. And yet, by the same token, we wanted to parlay it into something that was going to help the retail out. So the only thing we did differently once we started with the store in the reference to the private teaching, we kind of broadened the criteria a little bit, because I was teaching mostly by referral. And at that point, I had to open up the doors a little bit wider and kind of take all comers. And that was a real challenge, because, you'd get some people that, wouldn't even register on Mr. Spock's tricorder. They were just brain dead when they walked in. And we had to deal with that. I'd say, okay, fine, we got to do something with them. And we all tried to do something with them. Eventually, I added on more teachers. And the teaching's not real commercial, though, in the sense that we have our criteria, we have our standards. We're very clear about that up front. We're not going to do, we're not babysitting anybody. And, so sometimes the turnover is pretty substantial. There are other places in town that'll sit there and, sit down and teach 25-year-old rock tunes all year, and at the end of, the year, the kid knows how to play the ocean or something. But that's about it. And we don't do that. We do maintain standards, but we adjust this pace according to what we think the student can handle.
In the private teaching area of the industry right now, there's been a big movement in self-teaching books and software and things of that sort. How has that affected your business in private teaching?
Oh, yeah, it's affected it quite a bit. We've talked about this a lot in this organization I belong to. There are generational changes. Philosophically, there are generational changes about every 5 years or so. And the way I taught 10 years ago is very different than the way I teach now. I could use challenge a lot more. I could throw something in front of a kid and say, I bet you can't do that. That'd be a sure way of getting them to do it. Now it's much more entertainment oriented, and that's why a lot of these self-teaching things have worked, because to us they're almost babified. They're almost overly simplistic. There's some of them that are better than others. I'm not downing the whole group, but the trouble is that you don't get. There's a difference with being able to copy something and mimic something and thinking on the instrument. That's two entirely different things. If you can think on the instrument, then you're going to be a proficient player. But if you just all you're going to do is mimic something that somebody else taught you, it never shows you the application. It's kind of like learning, you're going to go to Mexico City for a vacation, so you learn a few Spanish phrases so you can find the bathroom in a restaurant and all that sort of thing. But you never really get the working knowledge of the language that you can really communicate with somebody else. And that's what we fight with, those things, because they're kind of quick fixes and they'll give some instant gratification. And that's what we're kind of up against, the whole concept of instant gratification. You guys know that if you've been practicing an instrument, that there ain't no instant gratification. As a matter of fact, from my standpoint, when I've had to do little talks like this before and people, talked about the many different things that I did, to my way of thinking, the way I see myself, the only talent that I really have, and most of the people that I know are successful, is tenacity. Just hitting it and hitting it and hitting it until you finally make some breakthroughs. The smarter you can hit it, the better off you're going to be, but you still wind up having to hit it over and over and over again. And a lot of those self-help books, they don't address that. They just give you a little bit of, like a quick fix, give you a little bit of pleasure for being able to play a couple tunes, and that's fine if that's all you want. But if you want something more than that, and we feel that when somebody comes to us for lessons, they're not paying us to do that because they don't have to. They're paying us to do something more than that. So that's kind of the way we approach that. It's a problem for us, but we still have about 165 students a week coming through there, so it hasn't been a tremendous problem.
I've had a lot of conversations with private teachers recently about the state of private teaching today and how parents view it. Is it important at all? I see a lot of kids stopping lessons when the grades start to go down. And I think that's become an increasing problem. People don't view music lessons as important as academic lessons. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, well, yeah, I mean, that's certainly the case. And you know, of course, from my standpoint, it's kind of foolish. But what it really reflects is is a bigger problem, the fact that there's a lot of, the approach that a lot of parents take with their kids is to make them jacks of all trades and masters of none. They want to skim over the top of everything. You know, so the kid's in, you know, he's in a little league team and he sits on the bench and he gets a trophy at the end of the season. And, you know, and the kid's in karate and never really learns the katas and never learns all the stuff he's supposed to learn to be karate, but he gets a belt. And it's all about participation. It's just participation, participation, participation. So I find that in most of the cases where that happens, it's not because the kid wouldn't have the time to devote to music. It's just he's so diversified, he's spread out so thin that there's no time for the music part, you know, so and music just kind of gets put on the same level as everything else. Now, I guess you could argue that and say, well, okay, then that's where it belongs for that particular individual, but sometimes they don't have much choice, because one of the things we see, for instance, that, you know, because I teach drums, you know, drums is not as socially acceptable to most parents as piano, let's say. That's, oh, wonderful, your kid wants to play piano, we can have a pretty piano in the front room. And then the kid wants to play drums, you think, oh my God, then we can't watch TV anymore, you know. So, so it's a different attitude entirely. And we see people coming to us for the lessons almost as a punitive thing. Like, okay, you want to play drums? Well, damn it, you're going to take lessons, you know, and this guy's going to iron you out, and we're going to make sure you never want to play this instrument again. And that's kind of the attitude they take, you know. So it's, you know, with that going in, with that kind of, you know, that kind of negative sort of reinforcement, you know, you're kind of fighting that to a tremendous extent. But the kid never really has an opportunity to get involved because they're spread out so thin. Then, of course, you have other problems, too. You have, you know, all the No Child Left Behind and the Back to Basics movement, and the first thing that goes is art, and anything that's cultural. That's the first thing they shoot away. And yet, you know, from our standpoint, I mean, you know, from an objective, you know, viewpoint, I mean, it's like, gee whiz, we're having to suffer for the failings of the academic teachers and the academic system here. You know, this is stuff that's been coming on for years. It's not something that happened overnight. And yet, you know, there are so many studies that reinforce the idea of music as being a really important part of a balanced education and how it stimulates certain parts of the brain and enhances the learning process. And it's like, it's so obvious, and yet they'll flush it away immediately because it can't be quantified as easily. You know, they can quantify test scores for English and algebra and all that sort of stuff, but they can't quantify the music quite so much. So schools don't support it as much, and the school music programs are in horrible shape. You know, I mean, there are pockets across the country that are doing real well, but for the most part, it's kind of in limbo right now, and that's another aspect of it. If you had, when we're working with kids on an individual basis, you'd hope they have an outlet, but they really have very few outlets. And the band programs themselves are kind of, they've kind of gotten on life support to a tremendous extent. Again, not every one of them. I can point out some great bands around the city that are doing a great job, but for the most part, they're kind of on life support. And, you know, the band directors are just scrambling to try to get something happening there. And then, you know, for something like piano, where's the social acceptance for it? Where's the peer group acceptance for it? I can remember when David, when your brother was playing back at, when he was back at St. Martin's, and he wanted to quit. He was playing great. He was playing his tail off, but there was no peer group acceptance for that, you know. And that's because there again, I mean, there's another layer to look at. There's no cultural reinforcement. You know, one of the points I make to people a lot is that, you know, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, if you went to a movie, even if you had never been exposed to anything but, you know, rock or pop music your whole life, if you went to a movie, you'd hear an orchestra. For the most, and so you'd be exposed to something a little different. Even if you weren't aware of it, it'd be subliminal. That's not even happening anymore. So now you've got like rock pop grandparents reinforcing rock pop parents who reinforce rock pop children, you know, grandchildren. And it's like a snake eating its tail. So, you know, to step out of that culturally, is really, really difficult. And so there's no incentive, I think, for a lot of kids to get into the, to really delve into an instrument, unless they can find an outlet. And one of the things we're working on right now in relation to the store is actually providing outlets, actually forming bands and band programs and trying to let the teachers, give the kids 50% of the input, and we do 50% of the input to make sure that they get a balanced experience.
I think we have a question.
Go.
I'm a drummer too, and I taught drums for
Sorry to hear that, man.
So am I. And I taught drums for about 2.5 years before coming to school here. And there's always that student who seems to show up every week just because their parents are making them, they just came from soccer practice, they're stopping at their lesson at Saturday, and then, they're going on to their karate lesson afterwards. And I had a lot of the same students for that whole span of time I was teaching. And a handful of them, I was able to sort of, sway their interest a little bit, sort of get them actually involved in it. I'm not exactly sure how I did that, though, and I'm sure you who've taught, a lot longer than I have might have some ideas. So is there like an example of a student that you were able to really like pull them into it, being interested in it?
Threaten them with bodily harm is really a good way to approach it. Yeah, say, hey, you're in my room and nobody's in here but you and I, that's what you're being paid for in private lessons. You're being paid to read that book, to read that kid. And you got to make changes, according to each individual. And that's what makes it so tough. So, and what the funny thing is that, my great love as far as playing music is concerned is playing jazz, which of course is primarily improvisational. And I almost look at the teaching the same way. It's like an improvisational thing. I've got a structure in mind, just like I do when I play a tune. There's a form there, there's a structure, but I got some things I can do with it, and that's what I try to do with the kids as much as I possibly can. It doesn't always work, and one thing I'm facing right now that's kind of an interesting problem that I never thought about before, I should have, is the aging thing. I don't feel old, and I don't think I look particularly old, but the kids don't identify with me as easily as they used to when I was 25. Then, oh yeah, he's a cool guy. Now I can only be cool for my age. So there's a factor there. That is a factor. Sometimes people come and automatically go for the young teacher, and that's fine too. As long as we can get them taught, I don't have much ego about that. But there's a lot of things. There's a lot of dynamics that you have to explore. And one of the things that I find is if you can get a hold of one of the, I hate to use this word, but one of the insecurities of this kid and reinforce them on that insecurity, you can usually make tremendous headway because that's what somebody else has been neglecting. I've had a lot of, I shouldn't, maybe the word fun is too strong, but I've really enjoyed taking on really problematical students. I taught a kid that has spina bifida. So he's paralyzed from the waist down. And we played drum set. And the way we did it was, I don't know if anybody's familiar with Trulock Gertu, East Indian drummer, but that's how we did it. Trulock plays bass drum parts with his right hand. He plays the bass and snare with his right hand because he's playing everything with his hands. He doesn't use his feet. Well, we went that direction. And just being able to explore a different route was great for me because I had to rethink the instrument a little bit. And this kid Frankie stayed with me for 17 years because having spina bifida, he couldn't really do much physical, and his father's a doctor, and his father realized that this was physical therapy for him, and if he didn't do something like this, he was going to atrophy. So that's how we looked at it. It was a combination drum lesson, physical therapy session, and he moved to Virginia a while back, and he's still playing. I've had kids who were spastic that I taught, and that's very interesting to do because when they finally start playing, you can't look at them, but if you can get them working properly, it all comes in on time and everything, but just how it gets there is almost amazing. You're going like, wait, how did that happen? But that's what you have to do. You have to kind of look, I think, for the weakness that nobody else has addressed and try to bolster up the confidence by strengthening that weakness. And usually, usually like a personality thing. It might be that the kid's hyper, or maybe it's the other way around. Maybe he's very reticent. It could be something that's simple, that obvious. So yeah, that's what you have to do. I mean, that's what you're being paid for, private lessons. It's not like you're going to follow this curriculum no matter who walks in the door. Yes, sir.
I was wondering about the online music sales. Are they cutting into brick-and-mortar retail?
Well, we do it too. Yeah, it's a necessary evil. What's happening there, though, is that, and that's a good question, really, because it's really reshaping the future of this whole business. The trouble with online is the fact that, like you guys are much more computer savvy than I am, I'm sure, and you're much more dependent, maybe dependent, or much more. You're going to approach the computer more easily than I would. And so what happens there is that there's a veracity that's given to what's online that's not really justified. And one of the problems with online stuff is that there's a lot of it's very deceptive, but people believe that just because it comes on that screen that there's some kind of universal truth about it, or it's a great deal or whatever it might be. A great example, I had a girl that came in the other day who went to eBay and wanted to get a pair of marching cymbals for a boyfriend who was playing in a brass band. And she got the cymbal, and she paid about $100 for it. And it was one cymbal, one marching cymbal. And so she had to come in and buy the other one. And if she had bought the pair from us, brand new, it would have been $130. So, but then when she had to buy the individual cymbal, they priced them differently, separately. So she wound up paying another $100. So I mean, she was trusting that because it was on eBay, because it was there, it was a great deal. What's happening on new equipment is that the manufacturers are really clamping down on it, and the MAP pricing and such, the minimum advertised price, is being reinforced very strongly. They're shutting down people immediately. But the trouble is that very often, some hotshots will come in, they'll make a big hit, they'll discount stuff like crazy. They'll just, leave a wake of disaster behind them, and then they go, and then by the time you've recovered from that, another group of hotshots will come in and do everything, and all the policing is after the fact. It's always, okay, well, they did that. We can't do anything about what they did, but we can only do something about what they will do, and by that time, the damage is done. And very often, it happens right around Christmas. You'll see somebody they'll come in with, OK, cymbals at 60% off, that kind of thing, and you go like, oh, good Lord. And then, you see, that's a good example right there. Cymbals, high-level cymbals are very individual. I mean, once you start getting the high-level cymbals, you're talking about handmade instruments. And they all sound different. I mean, you can fill a room full of 20-inch, medium-thin Zildjian rides, and they're all going to sound different. But so if you buy it online, it doesn't mean you can necessarily get what you want. You're just going to get a 20-inch medium-thin Zildjian ride. And what happens to us a lot is that they'll buy it online, bring it into us, and say, "Man, can I swap it for that one you got over there?" And you're like, "Well, no, we can't do that." "Well, why? It's new for new." And it's, yeah, but the bank, they want me to pay them and everything, So, it's when you come into a store like ours, what you're doing is you're actually paying for the ability to pick what you want, or paying for the service that we will make sure you get what you want, that you get exactly what you need, and that's what we try to do as much as we possibly can. So, it does affect us, but now we're playing the game too. And with online, it's just to make sure you have a presence, because there's some people that just don't want to go to brick and mortar. They don't want to leave the computer room. They want to just buy it, have it pop up on their doorstep and everything. But with some stuff, I mean, are there any brass players in here? So would you buy a trumpet online? Yeah, exactly. Why? Because you got to try it. I mean, they're all very different. And yet, by the same token, I mean, a lot of the stores locally don't address that because they don't keep enough trumpets in for you to try, that sort of thing. So there's, the local, it's not, the guys that are selling online. I mean, they're not raping and pillaging necessarily, because they're taking advantage of the fact that a lot of brick and mortar stores have gotten complacent, and you just can't do that. You have to stay on top of it.
Another question?
Question?
I was wondering how your teaching and your business were affected by Hurricane Katrina.
That's interesting, because we got back pretty quickly. My brother-in-law was able to pull some weight, and I got back in town pretty quickly. Within about 2 weeks, I was back here. The business had, we lost about $25,000 worth of inventory, which in the scheme of things was not much, mostly through roof leaks. And at home, about $15,000, but the house was not flooded or anything like that. And so what I did, my guys didn't come back for about 3 months. So I was by myself, basically. And at first, to really be honest, when I was sitting in Baton Rouge and evacuated, I was looking at everything on the news. And I had already contacted a friend of mine in Ohio who was had a wholesale place and said, do you have a job? Because I don't think there's anything to go back to. And then we got back and realized, how selective a lot of news reporting had been. And we said, oh, well, no, wait, this is different. I might be able to do something here. So what we really did, I got very, this sounds, I don't want this to sound self-serving or really corny, but really got very community active because I felt like that's what we were about. We had taken the biggest hit, you mentioned online, but the biggest hit we had taken was from Guitar Center, when Guitar Center came in. Because Guitar Center was just killing everybody. They were directing the market. Interestingly enough, right now, they're in this very strange mode, and they're really on a decline. But they were directing the market. They were bigger than most of the companies they were dealing with. They were worth more. So there was a tail wagging the dog. And what happened, several things happened after the hurricane. One was that all of a sudden people started coming in to the store, even though, you think people would, the last thing you think about would be drums, for God's sake, when your car's gone and your house is gone. But what I didn't think about was the fact that they wanted to feel good. They wanted things that made them really feel good. And that was one of the things right there, a musical instrument. So all of a sudden, we were selling drum sets. But the thing that amazed me was that the number of primarily, I'd say 16 to 20-year-olds that came in that we had never even seen before. It was a shock. Those are the Guitar Center customers. They hadn't even bothered to come over there. They were not, they weren't looking for any place else but Guitar Center. They weren't, the very fact that we had been there for 24 years didn't make any difference. They were dyed-in-the-wool Guitar Center customers. So I was really the only guy I knew in the whole country maybe that had the experience of a Guitar Center going away for a while. And so I took full advantage of that and tried to see if we could pull them into the fold, so to speak, and try to really be very, very service-oriented and be as helpful as I could. In the morning, I was going around to different schools and helping them clean up their band rooms and writing insurance quotes for them. And then around noon, 12:30 or so, I'd go into the store and I'd just wait for whoever would come in, and I was doing a lot of the same thing there. And by the time the guys got back, we were doing a lot of repairs, as you might imagine, and we were doing a lot of, replacement of instruments, doing a lot of insurance business. We were working with Mr. Holland's Opus Fund. We were working with Tipitina's Foundation. We were working with the Katrina Piano Fund. All these different organizations that were putting out, stuff for different musicians. We made it because I cut my margins way back. And in retrospect, I got to say, honestly, I found out that some of the other places in town, who shall go nameless, really started raping and pillaging during that period of time. We did just the opposite. We cut the margins back. And I contacted all the manufacturers, and I said, look, there's going to be a lot of need down here, and we need some help. Well, some of the manufacturers are incredible. Yamaha and Mapex both did something that I thought was unprecedented. They said, look, you understand the loss in your area. You know the people who are legitimate. So sell it to the guy for whatever you think is affordable for him. Send us the invoice, and we'll bill you according to what you sold it for. And make sure you make 30 points. Because we don't want you going under. So the industry actually rose up and helped us out. Yamaha, all the clinicians we had over the years, Peter Erskine, Dave Weckel, all these guys that we'd had over the years for clinics, 4 and 5 a year, they all donated money to pay my guys' salary. And they sent checks to all my guys while they were evacuated and kept them going. Same thing happened with the 5-star group. So, it was almost like a mandate, saying, wow, you guys have got to go back. You got to go back. And I never would have thought that would have happened in any industry. And it was probably the most heartwarming thing that I could have possibly imagined, because I figured everybody would say, oh, tough luck, I'm glad it was you and not me. And instead, the industry as a whole rose to the occasion and really supported us. And so, as a consequence, 2006 was an immensely strong year for us. It was the strongest year we ever had. Even though, margins were not as high as normal because we had cut them back on purpose, it didn't matter. I mean, it was just amazing how much replacement stuff we did. Long
Karen, you had a
answer.
question?
Another question.
You were saying, that, can you hear me? All right.
Yeah, go ahead.
When you get into symbols and everything, that handmade's better. To what extent, since you have to balance, your teaching aspect and your retail aspect, like when do you start teaching your students, how the instruments actually work, and like to what extent does that affect, your playing ability and so forth? And I guess it's kind of a related question, but there's a really big kick or trend in the drum community about making your own instruments, and like I guess in order to do that, you have to know how it works. And how does that affect your business and your teaching and all that?
Well, yeah, okay, I'll try to be real as brief on that as I can. The symbol thing and the selection of equipment, we try to educate everybody so that what we really want to do is give people enough guts to make their own decision. It's like the Nike shoe phenomena. A person, a lot of people who respond to marketing and, that way will go out and buy that Nike shoe even if it doesn't feel comfortable because it's got social acceptance, because it's got saturation marketing and all that stuff. Musical instruments have gotten way out of hand in that regard. And, so that's why certain companies just sign on these huge rosters of endorsers and they say, hey, look, this guy plays these cymbals. Well, I'll give you a good example. Emily and I got, when Billy Joel came in town a few years back, Liberty Vito was still playing with him, and he needed some equipment, and so he called me up because we had a clinic with him, and I brought something down for him, and as a result, they gave us backstage passes, and they gave us a tour of the stage, and we got to do the schmooze, the buffet, and all that stuff, and we got great seats, too. But we went to they had a whole repair area built underneath the stage for Billy Joel. Liberty had, 300 cymbals, maybe? About 300, probably as many cymbals as I got at the store, and all hand-picked. So, what happens when people go out and they hear that concert, they're going like, wow, I'm going to get one of those, No, you're not, unless you go to the Sabian factory and go through 500 of them to pick 300 of them. And that's exactly what they do, So there's a lot of hype on the endorsement thing, and people come in with a lot of preconceived ideas about what they need, and we try to see if we can educate them to make them feel confident enough to make their own choices, because what we see happening all the time is a guy comes in, he says, I'm playing with this death metal band, and, we play at volume levels that can sink Manhattan, and, I broke my crash cymbal, and I think what I need is a paper-thin Peisty. And you're going, oh, no, man, don't do that. And you try to talk them into what they really, kind of get them to realize that their type of playing reflects a certain range of choices. But, that doesn't always work, because if they got a preconceived idea, they're going to buy the preconceived idea. So I always tell the guys, say, look, always tell them what they need, but always give them what they want, because ultimately that's what they're going to buy. It's amazing. I've seen people pick out, blindfold, pick out a certain cymbal and then buy the one they came in to buy to begin with, even though they didn't like it as much. Because, for one thing, it's got more pure grip acceptance. As far as the making of drums is concerned, that's not a big factor. But, not to step on anybody's toes, because I was just talking to somebody earlier who made his own, actually recovered his own drums, so it's not the same thing. But you really got to know what you're doing. I made my own drum set when I was in Japan at Osaka. Yamaha let us, we went to their factory, and we all got to make our own drum sets. And there's physics involved. I mean, it's not just like, oh, yeah, we're going to wrap some wood together and put a head on it, No, there's physics involved. There's precision. There's a lot of precision engineering. And you guys in particular are used to a lot more consistent drums than we ever were. I mean, back like in the 60s, some of the stuff was really junk. And that's why it tickles me when I see so much nostalgia about those drums. Like, oh, man, those old 60s Ludwigs. Boy, there were some dogs in that group. And I mean, you know, drums you couldn't tune to save your life. You know, you sit and you think it's something wrong with you. You know, like, wow, what is this? You know, it doesn't really it bothers me only in the sense that if you got somebody who's real craftsman-like and he wants, you know, loves to work in the workshop and all that stuff, that's great. But if what he's trying to do is get his own instrument, he's not really going to know what he's going to get until it's finished. Whereas most of the companies, by the time they put out a high-level instrument, they have researched it pretty good. Sometimes it is a trial and error process. Like Pearl's got this reference series drum that's a hybrid thing with different kinds of woods. They worked on that about 3 years, and it was basically trial and error, just seeing what worked and what didn't, you know, and about 3 years of research there to get it out there. So, I mean, in one respect, I think it's wonderful. In another respect, I think unless you really enjoy that kind of thing, it's kind of it might be a waste of time, you know. I mean, we all built drums at one time at the store to see if we could put our own brand. And at the end of it, we all got some pretty good drums. They all sounded pretty good. And we thought it was the biggest pain in the tail we'd ever done and said, no, we're not going to do that again. So that was the end of the Ray Fransen Drum Center line of drums. And it's probably best that way, you know.
Jose is going to be our last question, and then I have one last question.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was just wondering what your opinion was about the condition of the instrumental retail in this city, because if a lot of us who are from the city, a lot of the major players have either deserted us or gone out of business. Wehrlein's, Ziegler's, Mitchell's. There's no quality music stores anymore. I mean, the only one I can really think of right now is C&M's, and I don't really consider them that much quality just because they don't really focus.
Yeah, it is a problem. It really is. And I was particularly kind of upset to see Fred Ziegler bail out. I thought that he was a little premature on that. As a matter of fact, I tried really hard to talk him into staying because Fred's a quality guy. I mean, Fred, you know, he would, if he would have come back, he would have probably been able to dominate the whole situation. I just think he was afraid that, I don't think he was really convinced that this area was going to snap back the way it did. It's a problem, man. You know, one of the big problems here, I think one of the reasons why music stores don't really proliferate here very much is because the indigenous music doesn't support the sale of a lot of new equipment. We have an older music here that we sell that's part of the city's, you know, overall, culture. And I've gone on gigs with my brand new sets and had guys say, man, don't bring those sets again because it looks wrong for this kind of music. They want something old and beat up because it looks more appropriate if you're playing Dixieland or traditional jazz or even, you know, like an old brass band or, you know, even Cajun Zydeco. So there's a certain nostalgia aspect about, you know, the music that's being propagated here, and the instruments that are appropriate to that, beat up old instruments. So new instrument sales are never really tremendous here by proportion to another city this size. You go to Nashville, and it's just the opposite. It's got to be bright, shiny, new, and expensive because that's the image they want to project. It's an entirely different attitude. Gary Forkham has a drum shop in Nashville. It's the most successful drum shop in the country. I mean, he kills us on. I couldn't even be a satellite store of his, and it's all because the criteria for the players is different. So I think that's why a lot of people get discouraged about, you know, maintaining that kind of thing here. For me, at this stage of the game, man, I mean, you know, I'm 3/4 of the way through the woods. You know, I'm not going to turn out and go back. You know, so it's to keep on moving forward. But it's unfortunate that you're right, though. There's not a lot of dedication to a broad range of instruments in that regard.
So do you think that there's a gap that can be filled there?
Oh, yeah.
Definitely.
But the trouble is the money it would be required to be substantial. What's being required now for franchises is really healthy. And you'd have to have, and then you have to look at what you're competing with. You know, let's take Guitar Center as an example. You'd have to have a facility that would be at least as impressive as theirs if you're going to do general instruments. You know, I mean, there are a couple places that are kind of like, you know, little, you know, neighborhood kind of look to them and everything, and they have a certain attraction. But if you want to be taken seriously, you'd have to have a hell of a selection, and you'd have to have a great presentation, and you'd have to have really knowledgeable people, and all that stuff is expensive. I mean, that's why I said I wouldn't want to be starting my business now. You know, it would be, disproportionately expensive to do it now. It really would be. I'm not saying you shouldn't, or you shouldn't think about it. But I do think that you know, if you're getting a good business background, you want to really make sure all the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted, and that you have the financing set up in such a way so that you're not going to put a noose around your neck. You know. Yes, ma'am.
Okay,
Last
my
one.
2-minute warning, but questions for you guys, so just hold tight for a second. Most of the people in this room are looking for jobs in the music industry, some performance related, some not. What advice would you have for them, particularly if they're looking for jobs in the New Orleans area?
Good question. New Orleans is a strange market, and you know, one of the things that has always hit me, one of the reasons why I went on a road so early, and I hope this doesn't sound cynical, but the New Orleans musicians, by and large, have a kind of have an adolescent kind of attitude about the business. They really do. It's almost like, I'm going to do this to escape regular work. And yet, you know, if you really do it right, it's going to be just as demanding and just as, you know, you have to be just as serious about it as anything else you would do. Once again, I'm not trying to patronize you all, but I think that anybody that's in this kind of program has already got the right idea, because you have to have a balance of the creative and the practical. And that's where I think you all have a huge advantage, because I believe right now that the New Orleans music scene is right on the cusp of being changed. It can be changed for the better, or it can be changed for the worse. There's an old guard attitude here that's been propagated over the years that, you know, that if you're going to be a musician, you're going to have to be bohemian, you're going to have to starve, you're going to have to do all this kind of stuff. And that's something that's just a conditioned thing that's happened. You guys probably have enough wherewithal to be able to change all that. The club owners have been used to dominating musicians for as long as I can remember. You know, when this became a right-to-work state, it got even worse. The union wasn't all that great, but boy, once it became a right-to-work, then it was like, okay, how cheap can you go? And, you know, so there are a lot of, you know, on a performance level, if there was some unification, if there was a, you know, a consensus among young musicians about what they would and would not do, okay, eventually they would be able to wield enough power, I believe, to change a lot of what's going on here. But it would take some real solidarity. It would take a real solid approach. And the other thing, too, is that you have to make sure that you keep yourself sharp and smart and sellable. You can't, if you get sucked into too much of the, que sera, you know, whatever will be kind of attitude, no, nothing's going to happen. More often than not, you have to make stuff happen. And it depends on how dedicated you might be to doing it. I think that, you know, for me, I mean, I hate to sound corny, and I'm not trying to get really, you know, maudlin with you guys, but, you know, it's really about maintaining your focus on your dreams and what you want, and your dreams will always motivate you. They'll take you through the bad sections. But the other part about it is making sure that the nuts and bolts are all in place so that your dreams don't undermine the practical day-to-day part of your life. And that's what you have to get a balance on. And if you get a balance on that, you can survive in almost any kind of environment in music. That's what I think it really comes down to. And there's been like I said, the great majority of musicians around here, they're very adolescent about the monetary aspect of it, about the contractual parts of it, about the business-like showing up on time, showing up ready to play, showing up in the condition to play. All that stuff, you know, it's all part of, you know, of being professional. And the thing that's driven it home for me is just working with so many guys like, you know, the Weckels and the Erskines and the Billy Coblins and all that. Man, those guys, they treat themselves as products. And they try to make sure their product is consistent as possible. And they're going to make sure that everybody else honors the product, but the first person they make responsible for the product is themselves. That's the first person they go after. And they're inveterate about that. They are just nonstop about it. So that would be my only general suggestion. I mean, there's some specific things about specific aspects of the field, but I think that's probably the most important thing.
that about wraps it up.
Thank you.